So, you want to know how I made this game in 3 days? Well, I'm going to tell you exactly what I did. If you watched my last video, you know that I participated in a game jam and heard me talk a bit about how it went. And if you didn't watch it, I'm not saying you should, but I mean, you know. So just as a quick overview, I'll talk about how I use Notion for brainstorming and note-taking. I used Unity to actually make the game itself, Visual Studio to code in, and some other tools to help me out along the way. Alright, enough of my babbling, let's get started. So I started using Notion about 3 months ago, and it's one of the most useful organizational tools I've ever worked with. And I mean that. You know I'm not sponsored because I've got like 10 subscribers. Shout out to the ones who subscribed though, I appreciate it. So it can be used for note-taking, scheduling, planning, and more. I personally like it because it will eventually allow me to have everything I want in one place, so I can finally have less than like 10 apps running out at the same time. Well, maybe not because I'm a programmer, but we'll see. So as you can see in the background, I can create pages, and within those pages are just tons and tons of components. To name just a few, you have different size titles and different types of text. You can add tables, you can add code snippets, you can add images, you can add embeds from the web, but one of the most important features are the databases. Here I'll add one to this page, and databases are really useful in Notion because you can store pages and pages of data that you have, and you can add to those pages different tags, different statuses, dates, etc. So it's really useful for just storing information as well. So when the Game Jam theme was released, I began to jot down my ideas with Notion. I started with the different types of game I could make, and then I started making some prompts based on the theme. So planets, aliens, Michael Jordan, the Space Jam reference of course. And then finally I made some big ideas for the game itself. I came up with about 5 big ideas in total, and I eventually went with the idea where you're an alien trying to manage a badly designed spaceship because I thought it was unique and it had some potential. I also added pictures for inspiration. I like this one. Now, before I start talking about what you actually use to make the game, I need to talk about what actually goes into the game. So, art, music, etc. That's game assets. In a jam, there's basically 2 ways to get your assets. You either make them yourself or you get them from somewhere else. Building your own assets can be a viable strategy, but with the time crunch, it makes things more stressful. It can be worth it depending on the judges, but sometimes you just need a place to get them. Especially for developers who are just beginning in game development, getting your assets from a store can be a lifesaver. And let me tell you, Unity Asset Store, holy cow man. If you haven't gone there, go there right now. Like, stop the video, just head over there right now. They've got tons of free assets and there's just so much selection, it's pretty crazy. There's also tons of other places too though, like freegameassets.com. There's places where you can get textures, music, 2D and 3D, art, and much more stuff. Just make sure you give attribution depending on the license they're posted with, but even if it's completely free to use, it's always a nice thing to do. So let's talk a bit about the star of the show, Unity Game Engine. I've been working with it for a while now, and honestly, when I started working with it, I was really overwhelmed. Like, what does any of this garbage mean? But once you learn the basics, it's pretty good to use. However, I still consider myself very much a beginner when I see how much can actually be done with Unity. Some of the things people are doing, actually insane. Anyways, so I pretty much just used Unity to set up the game scene and add some menu functionality, but all of the programming for the game mechanics I did in Visual Studio. Visual Studio is set as the default IDE to use with Unity, so I just stuck with it. Now, I will admit something, the code that I made is probably nowhere near as optimized as it should be, but you know what, that's okay. It's got personality. When making scripts, I usually make multiple scripts for different objects or purposes, and I find it easier to manage that way. So rather than going through all of the scripts I made, I'll just talk about some of the interesting ones. So this one right here was the script I used to affect the bobbing motion of the hands, which is done by changing the X and Y positions with sine and cos waves. And this reset meteor function just resets the asteroid timer to a random range and also like sets associated variables. Yes, I called it Reset Meteor instead of Reset Asteroid because I'm just like that. And this last code snippet right here is just a simple way that I make the game progressively harder by decreasing the cooldown as the score increases. So with about 2 hours left in the competition, everything was going well until I realized that I literally had no sound in the game. That's not great because sound is actually a huge part of feedback and immersion in games. At the same time, overdoing it with too much sound can actually have a negative effect.
Oh my god!
For some reason, in my panic, I guess, I decided to use GarageBand for my music and sound, where in retrospect, I could have just gotten some free assets. So I threw together 2 songs for the menu in the game using the loop samples within GarageBand. Really useful feature, by the way, saves a lot of time. But I also added some alarm sound effects by just using synthesizers. Synthesizers, great. But at that point, I had 1 hour left to work on the game, so I just added the sounds in game and submitted it. In the end, even with the pressure of getting it done in 3 games, it was still really fun to make the game and go through the whole learning process, and I'm hoping to learn a lot more in the future. So, yeah, thanks for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe or something. Yeah, I don't know how to end a video properly, so